Well, thank you for being with us, Mr. McDonnell. So we just heard from Keir Starmer, who said that he would like to see all schools open to all pupils from the 8th of March. Now, of course, that's not what the teaching unions are saying. Who do you think is right in this debate?
Well, the teaching unions are saying, very similar to Keir, that of course we want the schools to open, but it's got to be safe. And I can't think of anyone better to listen to than those on the front line, and that is the teachers' unions. It's interesting, I don't think this has happened very often, but all the teachers' unions, including those who represent the head teachers and school leaders, as well as the frontline teaching staff themselves, are all saying the same thing. So I think listen to the unions, and I don't think that's different from what Keir is saying. Keir is saying is when it's safe, and if we have to have a staggered reopening of the schools, let's listen to those on the front line.
OK, you're also calling today for a lot of the debts built up during the pandemic to be cancelled. So how much debt are we talking about, and how would you pay for it?
Well, at the moment, what we're finding is, well, look at the figures that have come out this morning. We've now got nearly 500,000 people, not just living in poverty, but in destitution. And if you look at what's coming from the Citizens Advice Bureau and the debt campaigning organisation Step Change, we have now about 1 million, well, just over 1 million in severe debt. Someone said one of the calculations from Step Change was there's about a £10 billion debt that's been caused by COVID on individuals and families themselves. It's a fair amount of money. But even if we just made a start on that, let's take the 600,000 who are behind with their rents and their mortgages. We're talking about £1 billion worth that's needed to take that pressure off them. And the way that you do that is, well, you know, we lifted the debt off the banks when the banks were in crisis. Hundreds of billions were lifted off them by taking the debt over by the Bank of England and therefore servicing it that much more cheaply. But actually, if you did want to pay for it in one fell swoop, why not have a windfall tax on those companies in the banks and the property developers, tech companies and others? Maybe some of those cronies have had contracts during the COVID crisis as well. Why not a windfall tax on them to lift the debt off the poorest? And you know, 1 in 5 of those in serious debt are key workers, the very people who are getting us through this pandemic. So I think it's one of those policies that's readily available. In fact, you know, Boris Johnson and others have referred back to the period after the Second World War. Rab Butler, as a Conservative Chancellor in '51, actually introduced a windfall tax on those companies who had made vast profits during the war and post-war period. So it's something that's been done time and time again.
I also note that you've said today there is a time for framing speeches and political positioning, but there is also a time to get angry and demand immediate action to help people survive. Who exactly is that message meant for?
For all of us, for all of us. Keir did a framing speech during the week where he, for me, you know, basically saying we need to be as radical as the Attlee government and we need to tackle inequality as our main central thrust of policy. That suits me fine. What we need to do now is roll that out. And I think all of us, both to the Labour front bench, Labour MPs, all those progressives, actually commentators as well, I think need to get serious with holding this government to account. And actually, I am angry. People are suffering, you know. People, those in debt, but also those who are struggling to get to work, have had their wages cut. And I am angry. My constituents have been treated badly during this pandemic. Only 2 miles down the road from here, I have Heathrow Limited, a company that is now doing fire and hire, sacking people, and then only re-employing them when they cut their wages. Outlawing fire and rehire as a policy, I think, is something we should all be arguing for now. And yes, I am angry about the way people are living in poverty. You know, a lot of those people on the front line who are trying to get us through this pandemic, some of them are having to live off food banks. That's unacceptable. And yet this government is now going to inflict upon many of them another pay freeze. So yeah, there's a lot to be angry about. And I think we need to hold this government to account. I'm glad you asked Hancock about the contracts. I wish you'd have gone further and asked him, is it a requirement to donate to the Tory party to get one of these contracts? Because that's what it appears to be at the moment, because there's VIP route for these contracts. So yes, I think people should get angry and should start demanding accountability from this government and demanding change.
Do you think that Keir Starmer should get a bit angrier then?
I think we're now moving into the phase where, yes, I don't think it's just on Keir's shoulders. I think it's for all of us who care about our community, whether you're a politician or a member of the community, or, yes, journalists as well. It's time to hold this government to account. 120,000 dead. Food banks now having to support so many people. Homelessness rising again. We've got a situation where we've now got a budget where we've only just heard the furlough be extended. That decision should have been made months ago. The government looks as though it's going to hold on to the £20 increase in universal credit, yet living off universal credit is thrusting people into, well, destitution, as we've seen in the figures today. We need action from this government. We need to hold it to account. And yes, we need to be putting forward alternatives now. We can't wait until the next election. We need to be bringing forward the policies that can provide people with hope and a vision of a better society. Keir's speech during the week framed this debate. Now we've got to drive it forward.
Do you think that people who voted for Keir Starmer in the leadership election, thinking that he would continue on some of the radical policies under yourself and Jeremy Corbyn, may have been a bit disappointed?
Well, look, I took the view, and Jeremy did the same, is that when we stood down, Jeremy as leader and me as Shadow Chancellor, we would not treat the incoming leadership in the way that we were treated, carping from the sidelines, etc. What we said we'd do is that we would support them all we could. And we have done that. And now what we want to do is support them in the rollout of a radical policy programme, the ways in which we hold this government to account, and the way in which we can present an alternative to this government. But what I'm saying is you can't leave that until so close to the next election. If we've learned anything, you need to present that vision, but then start presenting the details that will enable us to achieve that vision. And that does mean starting early rather than leaving it too late, because you've got to win the argument. Can I also say just one word of advice to Keir as well?
Means winning elections.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Which you and Jeremy Corbyn failed to do.
Winning an election. Well, the way, if you want to learn anything from us, we had an early election thrust upon us. In many ways, we lost the opportunity of bedding down and winning the argument over the vision of the society we want to create, or the individual policies. You need to start early. And that's what I'm saying. Let's get on with that now. Let's really now hold this government to account. Let's really now set out that clear vision, exactly as Keir did during the week, that radicalness of the Attlee government, tackling inequality, but let's start talking about the alternative programme, the detail of those policies. I have to say also, my only real word of advice to Keir as well, let's unite the party as he promised, and that does mean, giving the whip back to Jeremy Corbyn. Let's unite the party so we can move on and really be an effective opposition, holding this government to account but presenting an alternative. And also, the way we are at the moment, doing everything we can to support those people who are suffering so much under this government.
OK. John McDonnell, thank you very much for being on the programme this morning. Thank you.